Hello there, Doctor Who fans, and welcome to another Who Corner to Corner podcast. My name is Paul, and I'm here all on my own today because Geoff, my co-host, as you well know, is away doing other things, mostly a film festival of some sort, which apparently requires him to be hands-on and busy and doing stuff, so he's got no time for podcasting, unfortunately. But I know he is actually, in all seriousness, very, very busy. So with his apologies, I've decided to do this all on my own, this particular episode. So I'm afraid you're stuck with me for the next 30 minutes or so. But do you know what? I've got a really, really good treat for you because I'm going to look at a book. I'm going to do a little book review because I know you love all that sort of stuff. It's going to be a Doctor Who book or a Doctor Who related book anyway. And the reason for this is partly because, mostly because I actually really, really enjoyed the book. So I thought it was definitely well worth talking about. But also because actually we received, both me and Mr. Geoff, a lovely, lovely haul, a massive haul actually, of Target novelisations which have recently hit the market. If you've seen them, these are they. Look how lovely they are. We have 73 Yards by Scott Hancock. We've got Space Babies by Alison Rumfitt, who's new, so I'm looking forward to reading this actually. We have The Church on Ruby Road by Esme Jakimi Pearson, who we spoke about, who we spoke to actually. We interviewed her right at the start of this year after we'd read the hardback version of The Church on Ruby Road, which is an adaptation of the Russell T Davies story, which was the Christmas special for Doctor Who last year, and of course Rogue as well, which has just been published in these lovely, lovely Target novels. Look at these. I have to say, I do like the blue covers, the blue spines. Admittedly, they don't sit so well on my bookshelf of Targets, which are all white covers and white spines. But do you know what? The older Target novels were all sorts of different colours and designs, photographs, illustrations, and all sorts of things, as you well know over the years. And I am delighted, actually, that they are doing things a little bit differently on the Target novels now. So thank you to Steve Cole and all the people at BBC Books for continuing to publish Target novels for us. You know, I love the original stuff. I love original Doctor Who novels, but I do really also love the fact that they're still making adaptations of the stories that we saw on TV, because that for me is very nostalgic. Anyway, enough of that nonsense. I'm going to talk about the other book that arrived in my haul of Target books. It's actually this one here. Wow, look at this. Death in the Stars. For those of you who cannot see or are not watching on YouTube, it's by Bonnie Langford. Wow, Bonnie Langford. Co-written also by Jacqueline Rayner, or Jack Rayner, as you can see there, with Jack Rayner. And it's fabulous to see, really. So, I mean, you know, this is kind of a big deal in a way, because this is Bonnie Langford's debut novel, right? Now, Bonnie Langford, as I'm sure you all know, has had like over 50 years of a career in all sorts of brilliant things, right? On stage, in film, on TV, and she's co-authored, or she's written a Doctor Who book, right? Her first novel is a Doctor Who book. It could have been anything, but it's not. It's Doctor Who. So thank you, Bonnie, for choosing Doctor Who to create your first novel, you know, and I'm delighted that somebody like Jack Rayner is writing it with you, because Jack Rayner has written many brilliant original Doctor Who novels, Doctor Who stories for Big Finish, for example, audios, and BBC Books, of which I have a couple here. Talking about Big Finish, look at this. If you can't see this, listeners, this is my copy of the Marian Conspiracy from... Wow, 24. It's 24 years old. This is a cassette, right? I'm going to talk about this in a bit more detail in another podcast. But look at that. The Marian Conspiracy by Jack Rayner on cassette. How much do you want to give me for it? Offers in the post right now. It's not leaving my cold dead hands, by the way, but it'd be fun to see how much you'd all want for it, you know, or you'd be willing to give me for it. 40p, 45p, 50p, I don't know, whatever. Here's another of Jack Rayner's stories, the novel Earthworld, which is pretty cool, actually. It's an Eighth Doctor novel by the BBC from the 90s, or is it early 2000s? Thereabouts, anyway. I haven't actually checked, but I will do. It's 2001, so it's back from them. And Jack Rayner has written some fabulous Doctor Who novels. She's written some Blake Seven audios as well, and some of those have been just staggering. Really, really good, honestly. More stuff by Jack Rayner, please. I cannot get enough of it. Anyway, so back to Bonnie Langford, who, as you know, played the Doctor's companion, Melanie Bush, in 20 episodes of Doctor Who, thereabouts, in sort of 1986, 1987, kind of straddling the line between season 22, which was Colin Baker's season 23. I beg your pardon. That's Trial of a Time Lord, Colin Baker's final season as the Sixth Doctor. And of course, she went on to continue the role in Sylvester McCoy's first series as the Seventh Doctor. So, as I said, Bonnie herself has had a career spanning over 50 years. She is a beloved British actor. Now, the thing about Mel is that she has the dubious distinction of joining the Doctor on his travels before he'd actually met her. Rather gloriously, as you all know, she rejoined Doctor Who to give the 14th and the 15th Doctors a helping hand during his bi-regeneration, or bi-generation, or whatever that was. Either way, she was there. Brand new Mel, or same Mel, but a little bit older, which is fabulous. Brilliant to see her back in Doctor Who. And then, of course, she's been part of the unit family, right? She was there for the conclusion of season 1. So, anyway, I'm going to concentrate on the book. I've got my little thing on here which says, for those of you who saw my review of Andrew Cartmell's novel, the Paperback Sleuth, will know that I need to keep on focus. So I've got my little note here that flashes up saying, "Stay on target, stay on target," and in a kind of Star Wars kind of way. Anyway, so here we are. Let's focus. Let's stay on target with Death in the Stars, Bonnie's debut novel. So first things, the cover, right? I'm just going to hold this up here. And for those of you who can see it, have a look at this, right? Because I don't know what this is. There's like a giant eye in the middle of a kind of a hump thing. It sort of looks a bit like, I don't know, like a cave painting or something maybe a little bit more sophisticated than that, but I don't know. I mean, I don't know what it's supposed to be. I'm not really sure how it relates to the book, and it's kind of irritating me in some ways, but nonetheless, it's a certain style, right? And the fact it says a Melanie Bush mystery at the bottom of this kind of implies, or at least it implied to me, that what I was going to be reading was maybe something in the kind of I don't know, the sort of Agatha Christie kind of ballpark, if you like. I thought it was going to be that sort of a novel, kind of standard, maybe a little bit fun, sort of murder mystery kind of thing, and where all the suspects are kind of rounded up and analysed, and that sort of stuff. That kind of framework. It's not, actually. It's not. It's definitely not that. The blurb on the inside cover is perhaps a little bit more accurate. It kind of describes how the unlikely duo of Mel and Sabalom Glitz become embroiled in uncovering the mystery at the centre of a graveyard of spaceships, which also involves a bunch of murderous adolescents who seem very obsessed with throwing people into the somewhat hellish fuel tank of their stranded spaceship. Oh my god, that's awful. The mystery really is, why did these kids become so deadly, and can they be saved? Can they be put back on the right track, so to speak? Well, to find out, read the novel. I'm just going to say, I'm going to try and avoid big spoilers in here, so it's a bit of a challenge to kind of talk about the novel. I'll talk about what I like about it, and why I think it's so brilliant, and I will do so avoiding major plot spoilers. Okay, that's my challenge, and so I do have a few little notes on here, so if you see my eyes drift, that's kind of what I'm referencing, and also the stay on target little note, which is flashing up right now. So back to the mystery then. So as I said, the mystery is really, why did the kids become so deadly, and can they be saved / put back on the right track? Now, throughout this novel, Sabalom Glitz, he kind of takes a back seat in this. There is a lot of Glitz throughout the story, so Glitz fans, don't be concerned. There is a good splash of Sabalom throughout this book, but he does take a bit of a backseat, which is only right, because it's down to Mel. This is her story, so Mel takes the lead in working out the truth of the situation. Okay, so I'm not going to lie, before I started this book, I've never been a massive fan of Melanie Bush. I was in my teens when she joined Doctor Who, and my opinions of my kind of take on Bonnie Langford at the time. I'd seen her a lot in things like, those sort of Saturday shows and, Peter Pan and she's a pantomime artist. As far as I knew, that was all I knew at the age I was when she joined Doctor Who. Obviously, she'd done a lot more than just that. But I never felt that her character as Mel Bush was particularly rounded. And I think from that, even though I've heard a lot of Big Finish where she's become a lot better, we know a lot more about her, and I just wondered if there was enough here for Mel to kind of hold the story together. It's no reflection on Bonnie at all, but you know as well as I do, right, as Doctor Who fans, that the character of Mel Bush was never fully fleshed out at all. She was very much in the mould of kind of screaming companion. That's what John Nathan Turner wanted, is a sort of callback to the more traditional kind of girl companion of the Doctors, which is, probably a bad move at the time when it happened, because really what Doctor Who needed to do was move forward, which it eventually did with the character of Ace. So suddenly putting a halt on things. We'd had Janet Fielding's Tegan, we'd had Nyssa, we'd even had Adric and Turlough. All of those companions were relatively complex. Even if we didn't see all those complexities on the screen, they obviously came from somewhere. They had a certain take on things. They had certain behaviours that were true to their characters. Whereas Mel Bush, it seemed, didn't really have much of a character. She was very kind of naive. She was a screamer. She did a lot of screaming, and her kind of performance, if you like, was very kind of high level energy. Kind of like the Bonnie Langford of stage and screen, right? So I always used to have trouble with that, but. So yeah, it was a very odd thing. But however, okay, so just to kind of recap as well, for those of you who are not too sure about Mel, I'm sure most of you are, but in case you're not sure who Melanie Bush really is, well, here's a bit of backstory. We first met Mel in the middle of, as I said earlier, the Trial of a Time Lord, which is season 23. Now, she was introduced when the Sixth Doctor decided to present an adventure from his future, the Sixth Doctor being on trial. So we'd seen what the prosecution, the Valiant, are sort of thrown at him. The Doctor, you're a bad person because this happened. So the Doctor says, well, no, I'm not a bad person. Have a look at this. This shows you that I'm actually a really decent guy. So the Doctor presents an adventure from his future as evidence that, yes, he's actually a decent bloke with good intentions. Obviously, the Doctor hadn't watched to the end of Terror of the Vervoids because he might have just edited out the bit about committing genocide. Key learning point here, folks. Always watch things to the end before you make judgments on them, or in fact decide to use them as evidence in defence of your murderous actions, however well intended. So Mel then came back at the end of Trial of a Time Lord, the following kind of couple of parts of the following adventure. It was 14 episodes, but divided into 4 stories. The final story was a 2-part story, written by Robert Holmes. At least the first episode was. The last episode was then written by Pip and Jane Baker for reasons. Anyway, so Mel comes back in that final part of the adventure and kind of jumps into the TARDIS with the Doctor, who's kind of yet to meet her, right? She jumps into TARDIS to the sounds of carrot juice, carrot juice, carrot juice, and that was sadly the last we saw of Colin's Doctor. But Mel was still there when Doctor Who returned with Time and the Rani, and she continued as the 7th Doctor's companion for the rest of season 24, exiting stage right when Ace arrived in the final story of that season, Dragonfire. And I think really it wasn't perhaps until then that we as viewers perhaps really got a sense of who Mel really was. I think it was only when she was paired with Ace and the two of them had some little chats about their history and what motivated them and where they come from, I think, that I think we really got an insight into Melanie Bush. Although, thinking about it, even then it was something that was perhaps defined by its absence. I mean, Ace had a lot of backstory. Mel really didn't have any. She had nothing apart from perhaps what we'd already seen in her travels with the Doctor. And, so all we knew about Mel was what we'd seen on TV. We've been told that she's a computer programmer in her very first story, and we were told that she has a really good memory, right? She has the memory of an elephant. So she's almost like even better than photographic memory. She's got really good instant recall. But apart from that first adventure, we never really saw much of that or how that could affect a story. So that had all kind of been forgotten. The thing that had been pushed to the fore, at least as far as I'm concerned, was the screaming. There's a piece in Delta and the Bannermen when Delta gives birth to the little baby deltoid alien creature, right? Or it splits out of an egg at the end of there's a cliffhanger to episode 2, I think it is, or whichever one anyway. And Mel just screams her face off. She's been with the Doctor through all these travels, seen all kinds of weird aliens and all kinds of bizarre shit going on, and an alien hatches out of an egg and she screams her face off. Right? Why? It's just it's just bizarre. So anyway, there you go. But I keep staying on target. It's flashing up. Anyway, back to Dragonfire as a bit of context and history, I suppose. But as I'm saying, this is the first time I think I personally, anyway, had kind of got a sense of who Melanie Bush was. And, because in Dragonfire, in that whole adventure, she's interacting mostly with Ace. And in being paired up with Ace, she somehow seems, this is Mel I'm talking about now, Mel seems somehow more driven, right? More adventurous. And maybe that kind of partly explains why she would jump into a spaceship with Sable and Glitz at the end of it. She decides to, it seems really weird, right? That of all the endings Mel could have had, she decides to jump on a spaceship with the money-grabbing, opportunistic sort of space pirate, kind of sort of light-hearted space mercenary Sable and Glitz, and decides to travel with him through space in the restored Ice World spaceship, which is newly christened the Nosferatu 2, or in Death in the Stars, the Tutu, which I think is great. TU and the number 2, tutu, like a tutu. Anyway, it's a lot of fun, right? Okay, do not worry, right? It's all good. So, but yeah, it did used to strike me as a little bit strange, but in hindsight, that decision to dump everything, to split off with the Doctor and go with Glitz, maybe that kind of hints at depths to Melanie Bush that we perhaps never knew she had, right? So in terms of the fiction now, yes, there was a decision within the production, to sort of end Melanie's story at that point and go with Ace, right? That was the kind of, the behind the scenes thing. We know that. That's the fact of the situation. And, Bonnie, I think, seemed to be relatively okay that her contract wasn't going to be renewed, right? She was already successful. She's going to go on and do lots of other different things, Doctor Who is just one of many, 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 many things that she did, that she lent her name to, that she performed. So, I don't think that's particularly an acrimonious thing. But in terms of the story, it all seemed really odd. But maybe, right, again, within the fiction, maybe her making that decision hints at some depths we never saw. And I think, if I'm going to link to the book now, in Death to the Stars, we see some of those hidden depths, right? So, as I mentioned earlier, Mel is absolutely central to everything that goes on in this novel. So, if I was initially worried about whether or not Mel, the character of Mel, could carry a story, honestly, genuinely, I needn't have feared at all, 100%, because she absolutely drives everything that happens in these pages. It's Mel rather than the Doctor who is the agent of change. She's the catalyst in the novel that forces conflict and confrontation, and it's Mel who drives the book's characters and events towards the novel's conclusion, right? And rather brilliantly, right, this is the really good thing, this is the thing I really love about this, right, is that this adventurous, this driven version of Melanie Bush, who's a little bit more mature, but she's exactly the same Melanie Bush that we saw in Dragonfire and all her previous adventures. So the skill of the writing here is that there are no compromises to Mel's character. Like, none at all, right? Her energy is still there. Her sort of naivete is also still there, right? But it all sits perfectly alongside her need to get up and be active and to help these people and save the lives that need saving, which is really important because Glitz, right, true to his character, has no interest in them at all. He wants to get away from the whole thing. He just wants to save his skin, and throughout the whole thing, he sees some opportunities for making some money in the process, right, which is brilliant. And I love Glitz in this book as well. He is so Glitz. He is 100% Glitz, as much as Mel is 100% Mill. 100% Mill. 100% Melanie Bush, right? They are perfect. They are brilliantly written, and they are true to who we saw on TV, right? But perhaps Mel is a little bit more resourceful, right? As I said, we did see glimpses of that. We saw glimpses of Mel's insight and her resourcefulness in Trial of a Time Lord, and maybe in Paradise Towers, and probably Delta and the Bannermen as well. But it's always in the background. Here, it really comes to the forefront. We see, for example, how persuasive her energy and her passion for what's right can be, particularly on Glitz, right? And we also get a little bit of insight, as I said, into his mindset too. But it's clear, actually, just on a sort of aside, right? It's really clear that Mel offers Glitz a kind of redemption, right? Because he's a little bit of a seedy character, right? He does pretty questionable things. And it's interesting, I think, as well, because as well as Mel offering Glitz a sort of redemption through her sort of positivity and her enthusiasm and her passion and her kind of, oh, don't do that sort of thing, there's a reversal of that as well. Glitz also affects Mel, right, in a positive way. And I wondered, from reading this and then sort of going back to watch Dragonfire as well, that maybe it's Glitz's style of confidence, that kind of swagger, that sort of con man sort of approach, right? That sort of almost overconfidence, right, that he has. Rather than the Doctor's style of confidence, so which is rubbed off on Mel. So maybe it's Glitz that has had as much of, or even more of, an influence on Mel's on her character. But either way, as an aside, Glitz and Mel in this book feel, their relationship feels utterly believable. It feels like it's a mutually complementary situation. So, somehow now it's sort of, I'm not saying it fixes the ending of Dragonfire, but it makes it feel right. It feels like this was the right thing for Mel to do in her journey, and it's great for that, So, as I said, we have 100% Mel and we have 100% Glitz, and we see how those two characters kind of work together in a way that is really believable, and actually really nice to kind of see. What else do we see about Melanie Bush? Well, we do see her oft referenced but rarely seen computer skills. As I said, also her sharp memory. Both of those things come into play in ways in this novel which directly affects its course of events. And reading this, I just generally wish we'd see more of those things in the TV series, but anyway, it is what it is. But just to say, actually, despite making Mel the driver and the central character and everything that goes on in this story, she's not in charge of everything, right? So despite her best efforts, Melanie Bush is trying to survive this novel. And it's a very hairy situation. It's also a very fast-changing, very dynamic situation. There's a lot of stuff that is out of her control, So that means, there's a lot of stuff where the actions of other characters often force her onto the back foot, and it means her plans have to change. They're forced to change. It means the plans sometimes fail. It certainly means that on a lot of instances, especially towards the end, she has to improvise very, very quickly. So there's a lot of tension. There's a lot of excitement, actually, from chapter to chapter, and particularly when that moment in sort of third act of the story, I guess, when she and Glitz in the grand tradition of thrillers and murder mysteries, when our kind of core characters become the prime suspects. It's going to happen. It's just a question of how and what that means. So, that doesn't take any joy from it, because part of the joy is sort of finding those, those points of reference within the framework of a murder mystery thriller, and just seeing where it kind of ticks the boxes. How innovatively it does that, how differently it does that, how it does it. And what it means to Melanie and the other characters in the novel. So it's brilliant. I do love that, and I'm glad actually that this was written now rather than earlier on in the history of Doctor Who fiction, because I can kind of imagine, right, if this had been a new adventure, let's say we took exactly the same story, but it were written in the 90s as a Virgin New Adventures novel, right? There is no doubt in my mind, my twisted mind here, that whoever wrote that would have made an effort to kind of muscle her up, right? Muscle up Mel, and maybe in some alternate universe, right? There's a version of this story where Melanie Bush has gone all Melanie Ripley, right? She's armed with pulse rifles and grenade launchers, and she's going out to kill the bitch or whatever. But I don't know, maybe that's just me. I'm all aliened up because I've just been to see Alien Romulus as well. So, yeah, I might talk about that at some point, but who knows? Just, if Geoff goes on about Avatar, I'm going to go on about Alien. So we'll see how that goes. So anyway, stay on target. Back to the book, right? So she doesn't go all Ellen Ripley. That's what I was talking about. No, not at all, right? Bonnie and Jack Rayner as writers keep Mel just as we saw her in the TV series, right? Just as I've said, that is absolutely essential to this novel, right? It screams in everything, right? Which for me is just brilliant. She is, as I said, 100% Melanie Bush in this novel. Yes, she's a more fleshed out. She's arguably perhaps a more believable Melanie Bush. It depends, how you sort of reconcile with the version of Melanie Bush we saw in Trial of a Time Lord and how you feel about that. As I said, for me, it never felt believable. For you, maybe it did, which is great, which is brilliant. But for me, she feels more believable in the novel, right, in Death in the Stars, than she did on TV with the Doctor. But, she has a history here, and that history really rather wonderfully includes her travels with the Doctor. So yes, she's more mature, right, but in a very honest and credible way. And in fact, there's a moment, and this is a real turning point in the novel, and something that really got me more engaged with it, I guess, because there's the moment when Mel in the novel, in Death in the Stars, becomes really concerned that the Doctor, or at least a representation of the Doctor, right, for reasons I'm not going to divulge because, spoilers, is going to show up and take control of the situation. Now that, the return of the Doctor, the possibility of him sort of landing in the middle of this situation and taking control, she genuinely doesn't want that to happen. She's moved on. Not only does she not need the Doctor to come in and take control, she's got a handle on it. She doesn't need the Doctor, and this is the thing, because clearly at the end of Dragonfire, she felt at that point she doesn't need the Doctor, right? She doesn't need him anymore. And to be fair, the undercurrent at this point in the novel is that she probably doesn't need Glitz either, which I think he's very aware of, right? I think he's actually worried that she's going to go off and do her own thing, and it's sort of hinted at. Maybe it's a little bit stronger than a hint, actually. But it was certainly very clear to me at some point in reading this book that, Glitz feels that he needs Mel more than she needs him. I mean, they enjoy each other's company, right? And I think that's what Glitz likes. He likes having her around, even if she does irritate him at certain points. But I think he enjoys that irritation, right? It's brilliant. I said it before, and I'm probably going to say it a few times before this review is done. I love Glitz and Mel in this novel. There's not so much Glitz, but there's enough of him, right? That we get a good sense of who he is and what their relationship is. So what was I saying? So anyway, I do get the sense that they enjoy each other's company. This Melanie Bush here, she's very much a person who is very comfortable with who she is, where she is on her journey, and what she can achieve on her own as a driver of this story. She obviously doesn't think of herself as a driver of the story. She's trying to survive, the events that happen around her and sort things out for these nutcases that she's surrounded with, right? Who just want to kill her. And there's a sense at some point in the novel as well that this confidence that she has, it could overreach itself. She's kind of yes, she's a very confident person, but she's pushing it further forward, because she has to take control of the situation. If she doesn't, it will flip round and it will kill her and Glitz and everyone else around them, right? So she's got no option. She has to make things right. She has to put herself out there. She has to step over and throw herself more into this uncharted territory, and she sort of enjoys it, but she does have her doubts, and I love that because this is what heroes are made of, right? These kind of obstacles, the inner demons as much as the outer ones that are trying to kill us, are just as much things that have to be dealt with and overcome. They're going to change us in some way, right? And hopefully it's going to be a positive change by the end of the story. And that, I feel, is very much what kind of happens. So where are we at? We're at 30 minutes now. So I said to myself, I'm going to make this quick, and I could rattle on forever. But before I finish up, I'm going to talk a bit about the tone of the novel. Now, as I said before, it's kind of less a standard murder mystery, despite what the cover art and the blurb infer. There is a little bit of a framework of that within it, but it's very nebulous. It's very ghostly. It kind of dissolves into the background. Because it's much more, what comes to the forefront is much more a sort of pretty solid, almost hardcore sci-fi story. In that there's a very solid sci-fi science fiction premise at the very heart of it, and the surroundings, the spaceships, the space stations, and excuse me, and even the vending machines, all of that technology has a very solid feel about it. It feels very credible. There's a lot of science, a lot of gravity stuff going out, and as regular listeners to this podcast will know, that kind of stuff, when it's done well, pleases me a lot, and I love it when I see it in Doctor Who, so that's great. So there is that kind of hardcore sci-fi element which is quite strong to the story, but that's not all there is. Oh, no, there is more to this than just that. So if you're not a fan of that kind of hardcore sci-fi, don't worry, right? Because yes, it's there, but it's not the most prevalent thing in the novel, right? All of that stuff kind of is mixed in with a lot of whimsy, right? There's a very light touch to this novel, which kind of leans towards the sort of bizarre humour of things like Delta and the Bannermen. There's also a touch of the kind of dark satire and the sort of black humour of Paradise Towers. There are linguistic flourishes too, the sort of things that maybe echo the purple prose of Pip and Jane Baker. The authors of Mel's debut story, the custodians of a character perhaps, and even though I'm not a fan of that style, I was nonetheless, right, I was delighted to see bits of it in here in this novel. And the reason for that is because it just fits, right? It fits with the tone of season 24. It's that blend of gloriously high camp satire and darkness which kind of typified that season, which maybe perhaps reached its apogee in Delta and the Bannermen. That's a story where you get the ridiculousness of a situation that sees a bunch of aliens, weird squidgy aliens disguised as humans, travelling to a holiday camp in 1950s Wales, and all the hijinks that ensued in that story, and then killing them all in a needless, brutal act of singular violence, right? Because that's kind of a weird tonal shift. If you know that story, you know what I'm talking about, okay? So here in Death in the Stars, we have we have a situation which is really quite dark, and that darkness is not compromised, right? It's not really softened. It's very for those of you who are going to love this book, right, I'm holding up now William Golding's Lord of the Flies, which probably sends shivers down many sixth form A-level students of literature, because teachers suck all the joy and all the meaning out of suck all the joy out of that novel to give it loads of meaning and stuff, right? But nonetheless, at the heart of that novel, at the heart of Lord of the Flies, is a really horrific situation, one which we see repeated throughout history, which we as adults would like to kind of turn away from and perhaps think doesn't exist, but it could quite easily, very easily exist, and we've seen evidences of that and all sorts of stuff. So there's a real darkness on that, and it's here in Death in the Stars. There are a bunch of adolescents who are, as I said earlier, obsessed with throwing people into the fuel tank of their spaceship, right? I'm not going to tell you why, because that's kind of core to the novel, the story, and I'm not going to tell you what happens and whether it's resolved, if at all, but the journey towards understanding why they do that in here is it's hard, right? It's very, very dark, but at the same time there's a light touch, right? There's that as I said, that cheesiness we get, that campness that was as prevalent in season 24 as the kind of hardcore sci-fi, right? The stuff we saw in Dragonfire, perhaps. Again, Dragonfire, right? You've got lots of things going on. You've got sort of a little bit of metafiction, fiction referencing fiction. We got that sort of allegorical story of the Wizard of Oz going on in the background, right? We've got some existential sort of conversations going on. We've got basically the entire set designed as though it was the inside of a B-Jams. If you weren't around in the 80s, you won't know what B-Jams is, but B-Jams became Iceland, right? The big superstore where you buy all your frozen shit. So it's a bit like that. So so back on target, you've got this very weird conjoining, this sort of almost dysfunctional yet complementary sort of juxtaposition of glorious high camp hijinks stuff with some really, really dark stuff as well, and that is so perfectly in tune with season 24. It just fits brilliantly. Again, I don't want to spoil it, but for example, in Death in the Stars, there is there's an AI form, right, who takes on the form of a cheesy presenter from one of those Saturday mornings kids TV shows that we all used to see. When did they sort of run? From the late 70s, 80s, right through the 90s into the 2000s. The kind of thing, Saturday Superstore, Tiz Was, and that sort of stuff, right? And if that sounds weird, right, because the presenter also has an intelligent squirrel companion, right? So the AI takes both of those forms, right? It sounds pretty weird, right? It is very weird, and it's very kind of bizarrely camp, but it's also very brilliantly in tune with season 24. And not only that, it's not just there for the sake of it, it makes perfect sense in the context of the story, and it adds to the story in many, many wonderful ways. And there's a lot of writers out there, a lot of new writers who might get that wrong, who might fumble it. There's a lot of experienced writers who could make a complete hash of it, but Bonnie and Jack Rayner in this story make that work brilliantly. So it doesn't seem out of place. It just feels right, if you know what I mean. Okay. I also mentioned or made reference to some metatextual stuff, right? Some metafiction. We saw a bit of that in Delta. We saw a bit of it in Dragonfire as well, actually. So if you like that, if you're one of those readers who likes to see your fourth wall stretched almost to breaking, or at least enjoy a sort of splash of postmodernist metafiction, there is a bit of that in here, because there are lots and lots of references to not only older episodes of Doctor Who, particularly stories that Bonnie appeared in as Mel, but also lots of things that Bonnie herself has done throughout her career. There are references to stage and film characters and shows, and certain things, and and throughout TV as well, right? Her character on in EastEnders is quite important in some ways to this novel, right? So anyway, there's loads of those, and I kind of enjoyed spotting them. If you didn't spot them, or if you don't spot them all while you're reading this, they're all listed at the back of the novel, right, inside here somewhere. That's a blank page, but there's a handy little appendix at the end of Death in the Stars which kind of lists them all out. So anyway, there you go. I'm gonna close this off now. I'm gonna close it off by just saying, overall, I really, really, really enjoyed this book. I thought it was fast-paced. I thought it was exciting, and it was genuinely tense. And it seemed to be all those things at the right moments. Okay, it's also 100% science fiction. Thank you, because I love sci-fi, right? Actual sci-fi, and it links brilliantly. It links wonderfully to Doctor Who in terms of it being a continuation of season 24, minus the Doctor, obviously, with many references to stuff which, I'm going to be honest, I kind of suspect they probably come from Jack Rayner rather than Bonnie, but I could be wrong. It just depends how much of a hardcore Doctor Who nut Bonnie Langford is to know about things like Ravelox and Glitz's one-time companion Dibber, for those of you who remember the first 4 episodes of Trial of a Time Lord, and there are lots and lots of other really lovely but somehow quite deeply entrenched Doctor Who references, which I'm not going to spoil them for you here, but So anyway, so either way, to wrap it up, I think Death in the Stars is a wonderful, wonderful novel, and I sincerely do recommend it to all Doctor Who fans out there, particularly those who enjoyed season 24 and those who want to see more Melanie Bush, especially a Melanie Bush who is just as direct and adventurous and as passionate and as driven as we saw on TV, but perhaps is more rounded. I was going to say, perhaps a little bit more deeper and arguably more believable than she was from what we saw on TV. A Melanie Bush who has her own story to tell and who carries it with credibility, with courage, and with confidence. So there you go. Do please go out and get this. Do read it, because it's a very, very worthy addition. It's a glorious addition to the growing library of Doctor Who books, and I am delighted to own it. I'm really pleased that I read it, and please go out and read it. Nobody's paying me to say this, right? If I don't like a book, I will tell you, as listeners of the podcast will know, but I will give this 4 cups of tea out of 5. So that's how highly I rate it. 4 is actually quite a lot. So anyway, there you go. So that's all you're going to get from me. Thank you for listening to my little review of Bonnie and Jack's book, and I will see you again on the podcast with my good friend Geoff as soon as he's finished all his film festival duties. I'm actually going to be there at the film festival because I have to give out an award for a film or something, and drink a few drinks. So that's the way these rather glamorous events go. But yes, thank you for listening to me. Thank you as always for continuing to listen and support the podcast. You can tune into us every week. For those of you who are just listening to us for the first time, hello, hi. Do please stick around for more. We've got plenty more things to lay on you. All of it concerned with the wonderful world of our favourite TV show, Doctor Who. So I'll leave you there, and thank you again for listening. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time on Who Corner to Corner. Bye for now. Jazz hands, you see? Bonnie Langford right there. Jazz hands!